sector over there is growing pretty fast. In the first half of 2025, it pumped nearly $700 million into government coffers, surpassing a target of $400 million. Now, this highlighted the country's growing role as one of Africa's top mineral exporters. With the data, here's CGTN's Isaac Lukando.
The number of mineral buying centers has increased from 61 in November of 2020 to 109 this year, and mineral markets have grown from 41 to 43. Additionally, the government, in collaboration with the private sector, has established international standard gold refining facilities in several regions.
What if Africa no longer needed America to profit from its own resources? Tanzania just blocked United States mining firms and, instead of collapsing, it walked away with $700 million. No bailouts, no apologies, no Western giants calling the shots. This isn't just about gold or minerals, it's about power, leverage, and a continent rewriting the rules of global extraction. As Africa grows bolder and new partners move in, the old economic order is starting to crack. So how did Tanzania pull this off, and what does it mean for United States influence in Africa?
Africa's resource story is being rewritten in real time, and the latest chapter is unfolding in East Africa. For decades, global mining powerhouses from the West set the rules, extracted the wealth, and left African states with limited leverage. Today, that balance is shifting. Tanzania's decision to restrict United States mining firms and still walk away with an estimated $700 million in gains, has sent a sharp signal across global markets. Economic independence is no longer a slogan, it is a strategy. For supporters, this is proof that Africa can assert control over its resources without economic collapse. For critics, it is a warning sign that foreign investors may be facing a tougher, less predictable future on the continent. Tanzania's move did not happen overnight, nor was it driven by ideology alone. It was the result of years of domestic frustration over contracts widely viewed as unequal, revenue losses blamed on tax loopholes, and a growing political belief that strategic minerals should serve national development before foreign profit. In recent years, Tanzanian authorities tightened regulations governing mining licenses, export rules, and ownership structures. These policies effectively limited the operating space of several foreign firms, including those linked to the United States, while giving the government greater oversight of production, pricing, and exports. At the heart of the shift was a recalibration of mining laws. Tanzania revised its mining framework to increase state participation, mandate higher royalties, and require greater transparency in contracts. New rules emphasized local beneficiation, processing minerals inside the country rather than exporting raw ore. This move alone reshaped the economics of the sector. By forcing value addition at home, Tanzania aimed to capture more income across the supply chain, from refining to logistics, instead of relying solely on extraction fees. Political motivations were equally important. Domestically, leaders faced public pressure to demonstrate that Tanzania's natural wealth was benefiting ordinary citizens. Mining had long been criticized as an enclave industry, generating impressive export figures but limited local impact. Restricting certain foreign players became a powerful political statement. Tanzania was reclaiming sovereignty over its resources. Internationally, the move aligned with a broader African trend of resource nationalism, as governments across the continent reassessed the cost of open-door policies toward Western extractive industries. Despite warnings that restricting United States mining firms would scare away capital, Tanzania's mining revenues surged. Officials point to a combination of higher royalties, renegotiated contracts, and stricter enforcement as key drivers behind the reported $700 million gain. Gold exports, in particular, played a central role. By improving oversight of production volumes and export channels, the government reduced leakages that had previously drained state income. Improved tax collection mechanisms ensured that profits were more accurately declared and taxed. Another major factor was diversification of partnerships. As United States firms faced tighter scrutiny or reduced access, investors from other regions stepped in. Companies and state-backed entities from Asia, the Middle East, and other parts of Africa expanded their presence, often under terms more favorable to the Tanzanian state. These partners were more willing to accept joint ventures, local equity participation, and infrastructure for resources arrangements. The result was not a collapse in investment, but a reorientation. Local value addition further boosted earnings. Tanzania invested in domestic smelting, refining, and processing capacity, reducing its dependence on exporting unprocessed minerals. This shift created new revenue streams through export of semi-finished and finished products, which command higher prices on global markets. It also generated employment and strengthened industrial linkages, amplifying the economic impact beyond mining alone. Analysts note that while the upfront costs of building processing facilities were significant, the long-term payoff appears substantial. The geopolitical implications are impossible to ignore. For the United States, Tanzania's stance represents a broader challenge to Western economic influence in Africa. Mining has long been a cornerstone of Western engagement on the continent, providing access to critical minerals essential for global industries. As African states assert greater control, the traditional model, where foreign firms enjoyed generous concessions in exchange for investment, is under strain. Tanzania's example suggests that African governments may no longer view Western capital as indispensable. At the same time, competition from China and other emerging powers looms large. These actors often present themselves as pragmatic partners, emphasizing infrastructure development, financing, and non-interference in domestic politics. In Tanzania's case, alternative investors filled gaps left by restricted United States firms, reinforcing the perception that Africa has options. This diversification of partnerships reduces dependency on any single power and strengthens bargaining positions for resource-rich states. Within the broader BRICS-aligned economic conversation, Tanzania's approach resonates with calls for a more multipolar global order. Resource nationalism is increasingly framed not as isolationism, but as strategic leverage. By controlling access to critical minerals, African countries can influence global supply chains and negotiate better terms in trade, finance, and development assistance. Tanzania's $700 million gain has become a talking point in policy circles across the continent. Expert reactions are divided. Supporters argue that Tanzania has demonstrated how firm regulation and assertive policy can unlock hidden value. They point to improved fiscal outcomes, greater domestic processing, and enhanced transparency as evidence that the strategy is working. From this perspective, the restriction of United States mining firms was less about exclusion and more about recalibrating power relations in favor of the host country. Skeptics, however, warn of potential risks. Foreign investors value predictability, and sudden regulatory shifts can raise perceptions of political risk. While alternative investors may step in, critics argue they may not always bring the same technological expertise, environmental standards, or long-term commitment. There are also concerns that excessive state control could lead to inefficiencies, corruption, or mismanagement if institutions are not strong enough to handle expanded roles. Economic implications extend beyond mining. Tanzania's stance sends a signal to investors across sectors, from energy to manufacturing. For some, it underscores the need for deeper engagement with local priorities and development goals. For others, it raises caution about regulatory volatility. The challenge for Tanzania will be maintaining a balance, asserting sovereignty without undermining confidence in the investment climate. Environmental and social considerations add another layer. Increased domestic processing can reduce raw exports, but it also brings environmental challenges associated with refining and smelting. Managing these impacts requires strong regulation and enforcement. Community relations are equally critical. If increased revenues do not translate into visible improvements in livelihoods, public support for resource nationalism could erode. For the United States, the episode raises uncomfortable questions about its Africa strategy. As African nations diversify partnerships and assert greater control, traditional influence tools may lose effectiveness. Engagement based on mutual benefit, technology transfer, and respect for domestic priorities may become more important than market dominance. Tanzania's case illustrates that Africa is no longer a passive arena in global economic competition. Looking ahead, the key question is whether Tanzania's move represents a lasting shift or a temporary political maneuver. Much depends on execution. If increased revenues are invested in infrastructure, education, and industrial capacity, the model could gain legitimacy and inspire replication elsewhere. If missteps occur, such as declining investment quality or governance challenges, the narrative could shift quickly. There is also the question of scalability. Tanzania's mineral endowment, institutional capacity, and geopolitical positioning are unique. Not all African countries can replicate the same approach with equal success. However, the underlying principle, asserting control over resources while diversifying partnerships, is increasingly attractive across the continent. In the end, Tanzania's $700 million gain is about more than money. It symbolizes a broader rethinking of Africa's place in the global economy. By restricting United States mining firms and still thriving, Tanzania has challenged assumptions about dependence and power. Whether this becomes a blueprint for the future or a cautionary tale will depend on what comes next. One thing is clear: Africa's economic confidence is growing, and the world is being forced to take notice.